Hey everyone, it's Horror Free For All, and I hope you're doing well today. I've decided to keep on pushing through the Tales from the Crypt ranking videos I'm doing, and for this installment, we're going to be looking at Season 5. Now, Season 5 only lasted 13 episodes, so this is one of the shorter seasons in comparison to some others. I think Season 2 had 18 episodes, and Seasons 3 and 4, I think, had 14 apiece. So this one had about one less than the two seasons prior, and a little over double than what season 1 had. So there's quite a bit of episodes to talk about here. But off the bat about season 5, this season seems to have a lot of fan favorites in here, like seasons 2, even 1 for that matter, and seasons 3 and seasons 4 as well. Once we get past this season, normally people don't really talk about season 6 or season 7. And I'm going to be upfront and honest with you about my take on season 5. My favorites are probably going to be considered hot takes by a good amount of you, especially when you hear some comments I have about certain fan favorite episodes here. I just think this season, while it isn't the strongest one, at least comparing it to the highs in my love and admiration for things from season 1 through 4, or at least in the consistency of that, this probably is my least favorite out of the first 5 seasons, but that's still not saying too much because I still think season 5 is a strong season. Now, it's a bit all over the place. I think this has the most inconsistency across the whole show so far. And if you don't know my categories of how I base that, I like to run from the bottom through the top. Genuinely awful, bad, meh, okay, decent, good, very good, great, and perfect. And out of all the categories that didn't get any entries, it was only perfect and bad that got 0. So, for the first time, we have a genuinely awful. It took 5 seasons to hit this, and granted, mild spoiler, there's only 2 episodes I put in the genuinely awful category across my entire viewing experience, and a total of only 5 episodes that got a bad or genuinely awful combined. So, that speaks to the show's testament. So, if the episode I'm about to berate and bash a little bit is one of your favorites, I apologize, but I hate it deeply. So yeah, kind of all over the place. But let's start off with the genuinely awful. At the bottom, at number 13, we have episode 54, As Ye Sow. This comes from Shock Suspense Stories number 14, and I gave this a 1.25 out of 5 stars. This quite possibly is my least favorite Tales from the Crypt episode of the entire show. Not only does this premise not do it for me, not only is it already been done at this point many times before, it's almost too unorthodox and unbelievable. The main character is really dumb and the motives don't really make fucking sense. The editing is sloppy in this episode. The morals in it don't really play up like they're supposed to. It kind of ends on a weird fucking note, and you don't really know how to make sense of what just fucking happened. But nonetheless, it has some weird quirks about it that are kind of charming in terms of like technical abilities and like the style of shooting that I kind of dug. But there's also some really bad effects here too to kind of balance that out into the pile of shit that this episode was. But the concept is essentially this, take a shot if you heard this concept before. Jealous husband has some insecurities about his wife. So he decides to kind of follow his wife around or go through like some private detective agency to follow her around. And he has a sinking suspicion that she might be having an affair with a priest. Yeah. What the fuck? So he's going around the whole episode trying to look for clues of her adulterous ways, and he's like questioning her what the fuck a bra is, and he really has no idea what the fuck a bra is. Yeah, this guy's really fucking stupid, man. And not only that, as you get into the story, you start to realize that the guy may or may not be just imagining these things in his head due to his insecurity, and it tries to explore that more than episodes prior to it, like Split Second or, I don't know, Three's a Crowd with Possessive Husband stuff. But it's so bizarre, and you don't really know where it's going. And then by the end, you realize this was an all-for-nothing story, and it was kind of leaning that way anyway. But the way it ends is just a fucking wet fart, man. There's no real punchline to it other than the guy gets what's coming to him, and yeah, whatever. Yeah, maybe the acting was kind of good in this, but yeah, I really liked nothing about this episode. It was dull, uninteresting, seen it before, characters are really fucking dumb. I can go on and ramble about this, yeah, but I hate it. So that's why it's here. All right, at number 12, we have a meh episode to discuss. It's episode 56, Food for Thought. And this comes from Tales from the Crypt, number 40, and I gave this a flat 2 out of 5 stars. Now, Food for Thought stars Ernie Hudson. It has a circus setting or a traveling sideshow type of atmosphere going on, similar to Dig That Cat, He's Real Gone, Lower Berth, and another episode that we'll see on this season. But Food for Thought, I think, is one of the most mismanaged episodes of the entire show. It's commonly put in the worst of Tales from the Crypt by most dedicated fans, and I can see why. It's in my bottom 10, I think, for sure. It was a very weak episode. And the story, despite having some promise here, it just... we've seen it before. Just, this has a different skin on it. This guy, he may or may not be like this psychic front man of this sideshow carnival of freaks. He has his wife and that he's really controlling over, and he tries to like mind control her and bend her to do everything to his will. And he's very abusive towards her. Yeah, it's one of those stories, and it's unapologetic about it. And yeah, like, you see Ernie Hudson like licking a fucking bowl throughout this whole scene and one portion of it, and it's not done in like a creepy way. It's just bizarre as hell. That's one little jab to throw at it. But other than that, as the story goes along, the woman tries to find a way out of the situation. She finds a guy to potentially run away with that's also part of this traveling circus shit. And she comes up with this idea. Well, not really an idea, but a scenario to try to leave. And fortunately for her, this idea and plan pans out. And let's just say it involves a fucking gorilla that's with the traveling circus. Now, the whole thing that really hangs me up about this story is that the characters suck, all right? The concept is very hard to watch. And also, when we get down to the ending, I still cannot fathom what the fuck actually happened here. Throughout the story, there might be some breadcrumbs that this guy, he can kind of like read the thoughts and like get into the minds of others. And there's this slight setup that he can possibly do it to other things around the carnival, let's just say. And the ending is so ambiguous. There's like 3 things to interpret. It involves this gorilla shit falling from the ceiling of this guy's, I guess, mobile home or trailer. Did he like try to turn his wife into a gorilla, or did she morph into one? Or was he talking to the gorilla the whole time? Or did the wife throw the gorilla on him? I don't fucking know. But other than that, I think the climax is trying to play up that the gorilla was somehow communicating with him. And, yeah, makes no fucking sense. That's why it's here. It has a similar ending to Top Billing and some other funny cornball gags dealing with body parts type of endings that you'll see in Crypt. But, yeah, it's not that good. It's very meh. And it was slightly disappointing to see Ernie Hudson get an episode this vapid. But then again, Ernie Hudson hasn't had the best luck in his career, so kind of fits sadly. Even though I love the man, yeah, that's why it's here. Okay, and the only okay episode right above this one, at number 11, we have episode 63, Oil's Well That Ends Well. This comes from Tales from the Crypt, number 34, and I gave this a 2.75 out of 5 stars. This one stars Lou Diamond Phillips in it. That's about all I can actually remember off the top of my head about it, other than the concept. This one involves this guy played by Lou Diamond Phillips and this woman who's kind of like this girl boss before girl bosses became an archetype. They are looking to scam people out of money. And this episode, okay, I do remember this, has John Kassir actually in a live-action role, and we see some meta Crypt Keeper segments with that, which I think is really cool. Probably the best part to this whole episode, to be honest. But he is involved early on in the story, but something kind of happens to him, and they're looking for a new thing to, I guess, swindle out of people. And the concept for these two, played by this woman and the guy played by Lou Diamond Phillips, is to con these rich tycoons who hang out at this bar to invest into some oil that they supposedly found at this very, very old cemetery grounds. And they convince them to pitch in money. They go there to prospect for it, but they actually do find real oil here. Now, the oil is implied to maybe come from these dead bodies, I guess. But the rest of the episode goes down into the rigmarole of the two main characters possibly trying to double cross each other, and you go through the ups and downs of that and the loyalties of these men and who they really belong to, and betting on money that they've swindled out of other people to kind of front up the act a little bit. But then the twist comes near the end, and it's a fucking left field twist, y'all. And I feel kind of bad for the character that this bullshit happens to, because this shit, you do not see this coming, and it's almost absurd. And then you get a over the top ending, and that's basically the episode. So yeah, I do remember a little bit about it than I probably gave myself credit for, but yeah, this one was just kind of a wash a little bit. Fun performances. I like the final act to it. I like John Kassir. I like the meta nods and the Crypt Keeper segments. Other than that, this was kind of a boring ass episode. It does have some commentary about women living in a man's world. You know, this was probably based on a story written from the 40s and the 50s. Women were just starting to enter the professional workplace. You kind of see parallels with that here, with the girl trying to be a girl boss, her having more of an attitude towards men and wanting to be treated in a different way. We see like dialogue with that. That's kind of nice to see and refreshing. You don't really get that from Tales from the Crypt, because a lot of the time women are portrayed as floozies. But yeah, you know, different enough for the show, I guess, but not really all that remarkable for it to stand out in a good way for me. So that's why it's here in the okay column. Now we're entering the decent episodes. At number 10, we have episode 65, Till Death Do We Part. And this is based on a story from The Haunt of Fear number 12. And I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. Look, the reason why this episode is as high as it is is for John Stamos and the hot blonde woman that is basically in bra and panties almost the entire episode. Yeah. The concept of this one, though, is super weird, and I can totally understand if most people are kind of turned off by this or just kind of in the middle on it, but I thought this one was entertaining and actually kind of humorous, and I think the ending is very clever. So this one comes to look at something kind of unorthodox for this show. So we have this gigolo who is with an older woman, right? And he's being paid to be with her, but he actually finds this woman at this bar that may or may not be into him, but the old woman that he's like paid to like hang around with essentially is like a mobster boss kind of. And she doesn't like this other woman being in the picture, and she's actually so intimidated by her because of how close her and John Stamos are getting, that she basically orders her gigolo to kill her or have her killed. And if he doesn't comply, something bad will happen to him. So they lead her out into the countryside, bra and panties and all. And basically, we get this sense that the guy, played by John Stamos, is going to run off with this woman. And they go through this whole elaborate plan to cover their tracks, get rid of all the loose ends that they have to get rid of, get all the money that they need to get from the specific safe at this location to get out of Dodge. But there's a recontextualization with the woman he befriended. And that kind of ties back to the early events of the episode later on, near the end, when you realize that a lot of this episode was all for nothing. And it was just a hypothetical thing. So that's basically the episode in a nutshell. You know, I do see the appeal in the hypothetical nature of the story here, where this is a story where you get to see contemplation of somebody who's in a non-traditional, or I guess unethical profession, trying to get out of what they're doing. There is some twang there, but you don't really get to feel that contemplation from John Stamos' character, other than he just wants a normal life and some normalcy. And I think that's what the story's really coming to talk about, is that you can be stuck in these weird day-to-day life scenarios or these larger-than-life lifestyles, but at the end of the day, everybody wants a hinge of normalcy, but normalcy comes at a cost, especially if you're trying to downgrade your lifestyle. I can see that message in the story, but it's not executed all that well, and the ending is hella morbid, involving the old woman. So, yeah, don't really buy that bullshit. But yeah, that's why it's here. It's down in the lower decent. At number 9, we have one of the more overrated episodes of the entire show. As a matter of fact, the next one above this is also in that camp, in my opinion. We have episode 59, House of Horror. This is based on a story from Tales from the Crypt number 21. And I also give this a 3 out of 5 stars. This is more on the upper end of a lower decent. But what the fuck are people on about this? This is like the most bland Tales from the Crypt story that can be somewhat decent, in my opinion. There's not a lot to this one. And there's also some repressed homosexuality going on with a super macho fraternity that can be kind of entertaining in like a John Waters film kind of way, but it's very weird. But the concept of it is simple. Kevin Dillon, he stars in this episode. He runs this fraternity, has his fraternity mates doing some weird bullshit. And they have this new hazing ritual idea that they want to, or I guess a traditional hazing ritual idea, where they're going to take them to a haunted house with the support of a fellow sorority to essentially send all the pledges in there and see if they can make it to the top of the house. And if whoever makes it up to the top and does a certain signal gets initiated, right? So they take the pledges there. The pledges kind of know the backstory. There's somebody that went missing there the year prior and nobody's seen them since. And one by one, these new pledges go in. But something weird and bizarre is going on in the house, let's just say. And they may or may not be dying. Well, after a certain point, we kind of figure out what happened to the guy from the year prior. And we figure out what the hell's going on with all the things inside, let's just say. And the leader of the fraternity may or may not get some comeuppance. And maybe even the entire fraternity. It's kind of ambiguous, though. But, yeah, this one was just hella dry. I mean, it has a weird beginning. And like I said, the repressed homosexuality stuff, you can clearly see it. And they're kind of making jokes at that. So this is one of the more humorous ones. And I do kind of find it funny in that, like, 80s comedy vibe, like a Weird Science or a Porky's. It has that vibe going for it, or a Revenge of the Nerds slightly. But the characters are super dull and cardboard. The concept is kind of spread thin to the max. And a lot of things happen off screen in an irritating way, to the point where it just kind of pisses me off. Now, I do like the end reveals and all that. I think that makes it fun, and that's pretty much what boosts it up to the decent. But other than that, yeah, I don't see what the fuck people see in this episode. So, there you go. Now, at number 8, we have another overrated one. This one's slightly, you know, I can see this one more than the other one. It's episode 62, Came the Dawn. Not to be confused with Comes the Dawn, which comes in the season 6 right after this. But this story comes from Shock Suspense Stories number 9, and I gave this a 3.25 out of 5 stars. Look, I think there's a movie called Dressed to Kill, and there's Robert Bloch's Psycho out there. If you ever found those stories and encountered them, you have seen this before. However, this one is entertaining because it has a young Brooke Shields in it, and it is kind of creepy, but it has a lot of narrative problems, and the story structure is almost a little too cut and dry and predictable for what this should have been. But nonetheless, I thought this was an entertaining episode. It's about this woman. She's stranded on the side of the road, and before all this transpires with this woman, there's like an epilogue going on where this woman and this random person are on a date, and she goes into the bathroom, and then she pretty much gets grisly murdered inside of the woman's bathroom, right? So to catch up to events, we think as the audience that this killer might be out there and might encounter this Brooke Shields character. Well, we start to get the suspicion that maybe Brooke Shields might be this killer from the bathroom from early on, because she has this suspicious behavior with this broken down car. Well, she ends up encountering this man who is kind of affluent, might be single, and has a pretty good estate nearby. And instead of having her sit in the rain all night, he offers to take her to his cabin and, you know, just wait out the trouble, and then he'll get her help later. Well, she thinks that there might be some catch involved, like maybe she is expected to be with him. But as the story goes along, she kind of drops her guard a little bit with the guy and starts to notice that the guy might not be so bad after all. And we're like obviously told from the perspective of the story that we're supposed to dislike her, and it's almost too much of an obvious red herring. And like I said, if you've seen Dressed to Kill or seen Psycho before, the twist at the end, take the twist out of those two stories. It's basically here. I'm not saying it's not well done or anything. It's just like when you have a story based around two characters and two characters alone, you want a bit more of a diametrical story. You want a more even platform for these characters, and I feel like it was too lopsided with one character to the point where it was obvious that it wasn't them. So it was predictable in the sense that we knew what was going to happen, and the angle of it, you know, this term cross-dressing killers, yes, I'm mildly spoiling what happens, is a thing in like horror suspense thrillers, especially of the past, but like this does nothing new with it. It's just the same old reveal, right? And I guess if you like the same old, this could hit higher for you. But compared to another episode that has mainly two characters interacting the whole story that's in this season, or other whodunits that the show has done, this one is probably the least engaging, maybe next to Werewolf Concerto, because you really know who it is the whole time. Maybe a little bit different case for Werewolf Concerto, but it's same idea here. So that's why it's here at the high decent. And I guess one last thing I can add real quick is that I do really appreciate the messages of the trusting strangers, and it's kind of a cautionary tale on like hitchhiking in general, or accepting rides from strangers, or agreeing to do things with strangers that you normally wouldn't do. It's telling you, regardless of the circumstance, you should be more cautious and weigh your options better. I do like that. So that does serve a message, a pretty sound one. But yeah, still a decent episode. Okay, ramble aside. Now we're entering the good, okay? So at number 7, I might upset a few of you, we have episode 58, 2 for the Show. This comes from Crime Suspense Stories number 17, and I gave this actually a high 3.75 out of 5 stars. All 3 of these good episodes in the season scored on the higher end of like a truly good one, pushing very good. So that's good for season 5 here. 2 for the Show is just an intriguing story, and I think it has a darkly comedic and well-executed twist. But then again, I think this one is kind of bogged down by more remedial things like the pacing of it. And after a certain point, it starts to kind of become obvious what the punchline is going to be involving the twist. And yeah, but what happens in the twist itself, what it actually states, is the shocking part, which I think kind of helps it there too. But this one is about this man. He learns that his wife plans on leaving him for another person. So he, in a fit of rage, murders her and stuffs her body in a trunk. Well, due to this happening, it might have caused a commotion and some attention to him. And now this police investigator is on his trail, trying to follow him, saying, "Where's the whereabouts of your wife? What's going? What happened? What do you think happened to your wife?" And he's like, "Well, she took a train somewhere, I think." So later on in the episode, he decides to go to a train station, bumps into him, and tries to repeat his story. And he's trying not to fumble. And he's like, "Well, I'm going on this train here." And the same police investigator, while off duty, is going on the same train. So the entire train ride, the police investigator is essentially grilling this man, because we as the audience think that he knows something that the man doesn't think that he knows, right? And he keeps asking, provocative questions to get some type of reaction out of the man. And it's very entertaining to see the guy try to swindle the cop a little bit. But after a certain point, there's a twist involving the luggage, and the guy thinks he's going to get rid of the smoking gun that's incriminating him. But what ends up happening is a twist you don't really see coming, but you see the punchline coming, right? Where there's another body. But the twist involved may or may not involve another character. And the ending is delightfully dark. So yeah, 2 for the show. I can honestly see myself bumping this up to like a very good one day. Same thing with maybe an episode above it, or maybe both above it, I don't know. But something about this episode just really clicked, especially by the final act. I think the final act is the best part of it. I think the first act is kind of slow, dealing with the whole wife murder stuff and trying to cover it up. It does take a while to click on, unfortunately. And I think without that detriment, this probably would have been a classic for the show for me. But yeah, I have it here at number 7. I think that's a pretty respectable place for it. All right, so, and also, I keep doing this. I also want to mention that I like, especially if you see the episode, right, you get the dual message from both perspectives of the main characters, because you have this contemplation with the cop. I don't want to get too much into spoiler territory about it, but it kind of plays on that rogue cop, trope, or that, living on the fine line of justice and duty, and living on the fine line of criminality and the dark underbelly, and how easy it is, or maybe there might be some, appeal to want to dip into both to kind of benefit yourself. I do like that. And, it's a fun little crime noir story for that. And I think it stands out from the rest. Okay, that aside again. Number 6, we have probably one of the more textbook, comic book feeling stories from Tales from the Crypt. Shocking, I know. But this story feels more in line with like DC Comics and Marvel Comics, anthology horror stuff. And I really dug it for that. So it's episode 61, Creep Course. This comes from The Haunt of Fear, number 23, and I give this a 3.75 out of 5 stars. Honestly, this story probably could have been in Creep Show, and I would have loved to see it. The concept in this feels like adult Goosebumps, essentially. So this girl, she's kind of quiet and reserved. She has this mild crush on this athletic guy at her school, but the athletic guy doesn't really talk to her, and she sees that the teacher, who, I forget his name, but he was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And also the guy that she has a crush on is Anthony Michael Hall, who was in Weird Science and Breakfast Club. But she notices that the jock guy gets scolded by the teacher quite a bit. So when the jock guy gets pretty much an ultimatum put on his lap that if he doesn't pass his upcoming tests, he's going to have pretty much his play schedule knocked out, and that's going to get in the way of his future, going to colleges and whatnot. So he asks her to get help. But when she finally meets up with him to see what kind of help he needs, maybe involving tutoring or whatnot, he's like, no, I don't need tutoring. I need you to use your connection and your smarts that you have in class to be able to go visit the teacher's house so you can get the answers for me. And if you can do this, I owe you whatever, right? And she's like surprisingly cool with it. But there's something up with that, and you start to kind of wonder why. But as the story goes along, when she goes to the teacher's house, he's an Egyptologist, essentially. And he may or may not have this replica built in his house because his family were like Egyptologists and tomb raiders and stuff. But there's a plot twist involving the teacher and the fellow student, right? But then there's another plot twist involving them later on. But essentially, the girl is trapped in this thing with like a mummy that may or may not be alive, and she has to find a way to get out of it, while the other two are debacling and doing whatever they want, And let's just say there's some comeuppance angle. And the ending is very bizarre, a little too out there, involving the girl. And that also plays into the actual like stinger. What? But this one was entertaining. All right, I think the acting performances was fun. I think the concept of having an Egyptian tomb replica in the home is kind of cool and creepy. I think the characters in the story kind of bring something intriguing to the table about extortion and cheating to get ahead, and how sometimes family reputations and lineages are built off of corruption, and that kind of plays kind of perfectly into an ancient mummy, because when we're dealing with ancient lineage and lineages of corruption, that kind of plays together. And I think having a fun little creature monster being to be the purveyor of justice was a nice little touch in that typical schlock way that I love in anthology horror. However, I think the reason why I put it this low and a high good and not any higher is it's like the final 6 minutes to me get a little too weird. Okay. But yeah, this one was entertaining and I quite enjoyed myself, so can't be too upset. All right, and to round out the good, at number 5, this spot might get me a lot of hate out there for saying this, but it still made my top 5, okay? We have episode 57, People Who Live in Brass Hearses. This comes from Vault of Horror number 27, and I gave this also a 3.75 out of 5 stars. Look, I totally get it. I forget the guy who plays the Ice Cream Man. He's great in this. Bill Paxton and Brad Dourif, excellent in this. And yeah, some gore brutality in this, and over-the-top things that happen to cadavers, or I guess people, is insane. Top notch. Other than that, story-wise, there's a little bit to be desired, and the ending is what the fuck. And I know a lot of people say they love the ending to this one, but come on, y'all. If you say you saw this ending coming, you're fucking lying, okay? And maybe that's the genius behind it. Maybe in a few years I'll end up loving the ending to this, but as of now, I'm just at a loss for words for how bewildering the fucking ending to this episode is. Probably the most random bullshit I've ever seen. But yeah, so this concept is pretty straightforward. This ex-convict and his brother, who might be on the spectrum, so to speak, of learning disabilities and stuff, they're coming up with this harebrained scheme to get revenge on this ice cream truck driver who turned in Bill Paxton's character to the point where he got arrested and served felony jail time. So now they're looking to get some revenge and payback on him, and maybe to acquire some money from the business that he works for, so he could not only steal from him, but maybe also put some blame on him at the same time. So throughout the story, it's just these two bozos following this ice cream truck driver around, going to his route. They come up with this harebrained scheme of putting on some ice cream truck, or I guess delivery house people from this ice cream warehouse, to impersonate them and somehow figure out how to get to this van to steal his money, essentially. Well, because they're dumb, they accidentally, get themselves caught. They have to silence a few people, and that builds up to the climax where the stakes are at the all-time high, because since they've made a mess of everything, they're even more urgent to get this over with. But let's just say the ice cream truck driver is way smarter than them, and he's prepared for what's going to happen, right? But it plays into the ending where the two guys think they won, or at least Bill Paxton's character does, because something may or may not happen to Brad Dourif's character. But yeah, that twist you do not fucking see coming. I'm sorry. Yeah. But yeah, People Who Live in Brass Hearses. This is one of the ones that is just entertaining as hell to watch. I don't know. There's something, synergistically working here. I'm sorry I butchered that word. But yeah, this one is one of the ones that will probably leave you speechless the first time you watch it, just because you're weren't expecting where it ends up. And honestly, there's some deprecation going on with these characters that I get some mild enjoyment out of. It's kind of poking fun at repeat criminals and dimwits out there, in the typical Tales from the Crypt fashion, but this one definitely plays up more comedically, and I do think that the comedy in here works. Some of the insults the brother has against his brother with a learning disability is kind of harsh and might be kind of dated by now, but it's still funny in its delivery, and I do see some plight in the humor of some of these over-the-top sequences that Brad Dourif's character finds himself in. Let's just say the whole scene with the safe, even though it happens off screen mildly, I'm kind of pissed off about that. It's still morbidly fun. Yeah, not much substance to this one. Maybe the closest thing you can look at is repeat offenders. Vengeance is not worth it sometimes. Sometimes you should just call it quits before it gets out of hand, and that's about it. Not a lot to it, but I can definitely see why people kind of love this one. So yeah, there you go. Now, rounding out the top 4 here, we got 2 very goods here. And at number 4, we have episode 53, Death of Some Salesman. This comes from The Haunt of Fear, number 15. And I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, so this one reminds me of an episode from Monsters, I think, which is like the sister show to Tales from the Dark Side. I have to say, I think Monsters did this concept or a similar one to this actually better and more horrific. This one is just super fun. All right, this is like when you turn your brain off and you don't think about it too much. The more you think about it in a serious way, the more it doesn't make fucking sense, at least in terms of some of these characters. But this one has Ed Begley Jr. and Tim Curry playing 3 different characters in makeup. And let me tell you, Tim Curry does a fantastic job. Easy top 5 best performances of the entire Crypt show. Up there with Brian James, Joe Pesci, Joe Pantoliano, and somebody else I'm kind of blanking on. But yeah, the concept of this, you've probably seen it before. A sleazebag salesman trying to sell grave plots to people that don't really exist. He's going around these rural areas. He has his girlfriend back home. The story opens off on basically a softcore porno set. So yeah, seeing Ed Begley Jr. having sex with somebody, but yeah, that was, typical Crypt. And he goes on this journey throughout the state, going door to door, trying to rip people off. Well, eventually he ends up at this home of these 3 individuals, a husband, a wife, and a daughter. And all 3 of them are played by Tim Curry. And as the man gets to know this family and he's inside trying to sell stuff, he soon realizes that he's made a grave, grave mistake and that these people are batshit crazy. And you hear these motives behind these 2 people saying that they kill door-to-door salesmen that come over to their home because they always try to swindle money out of them. They bought something in the past, drained pretty much their life savings into it. It didn't work. So they had to fix it to make it work. And ever since then, they've been going on vendettas, killing people that come over to try to sell them stuff and taking the appliances and decorating their home with them. And you see on display like a television set with a body inside of it, a washing machine with a body inside of it or something like that. It's absolutely bad shit. And basically the character knows he's going to die. However, there is a woman in the story, the daughter, that the parents are like, well, maybe we don't have to kill him. Let's say if the daughter likes him and they get married, maybe we can let him live. So the daughter comes out, and she basically looks like Quasimodo, right? And Ed Begley Jr.'s character tries to convince her that he actually does love her, and there's like this bizarre-ass sex scene, and yeah, I don't even want to talk about it. Hard to watch. But essentially, the 2 of them get married, or are going to get married, but this was all a ruse for the character to try to get away from them and the family. And it comes to a point in the story where he tries to execute his escape plan, and we find out if it's successful or not. And there's a bunch of fake outs, kind of expected, kind of predictable. You've seen this come up in Tale before, but it's played out probably in one of the best ways possible. I've seen this similar twist done in. So yeah, that's why I gave Death of Some Salesman a 4 out of 5 stars. Look, it has some layers to it, surprisingly. When you look at the story on the surface level, you might think that this is just a fun, enjoyable one. But the themes in the story deal with scamming people and how that can affect the poor people. It comes to kind of bring some commentary or slight commentary about abusing the naive, abusing the poor, and taking from the poor to supply the rich. That's the kind of fuel that inspired Robin Hood to do what he did, right? And to kind of compare Robin Hood to vigilante justice of this family is morbid, but it kind of fits in this context where there are a poor family living out in a rural area, don't have much money, but you understand where they're coming from, which kind of gives them this weird, lovable charm and sympathy, to the point where you don't really feel bad for this salesman that gets what happens to him. I don't know. It's a morally gray story. However, when we start peeling back some of the character decisions in the story, specifically the dad, I don't want to get into too much depth without spoiling it, but I feel like his ass is way too butthurt about what happened. You know, it doesn't make sense why they keep on doing it, right? It just there's some disbelief you got to put at the door. And honestly, that sex scene with Quasimodo, one of the most disgusting things on Tales from the Crypt, and probably one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, no. But Tim Curry was awesome. Ed Begley Jr. was awesome. It was overly comedic, over the top in a lot of the right ways. Yeah, it could have been a little bit more creative in the ending, but like I said, it works splendidly well, and it's deserved here. So that's why I gave it a 4. All right, at number 3, now we're getting into some underrated episodes and some hot takes, I guess. Not a lot of people are going to have this episode this high. I can promise you that, but I just really dug this one, and I love it. I love it, love it, love it for Billy Zane. Okay, I said it. We have episode 60, Well-Cooked Hams. I gave this a 4.25 out of 5 stars, and this comes from Tales from the Crypt number 27. This one is super to the point. It's probably one of the more clear, concise episodes of the entire show. You don't really have to put too much thought into it, but there is some layers to peel back with it, and it's entertaining, right? And that's all you can really ask for in a story concept like this. So the concept is, this guy, he's a magician, but he's not really good at what he does. And we get some backstory as the story goes along about how he used to be this apprentice from this other guy that he keeps a poster of in his room. And something nefarious, let's just say, went down during his apprenticeship, where he thought that he was getting this advantage. But it never actually panned out the way he was. And he believes that the guy was a crook and a fraud. And he kind of makes this wish to himself in private that he wishes that somebody with real power can come to him and teach him what he needs to know. And sure enough, out of thin air, a new magician comes. Or let's just say a new character comes into the equation and has this new act that Billy Zane's character witnesses. And he thinks it's the most brilliant act he's ever seen. It involves some plunging swords into a coffin type of thing. And he thinks it's brilliant. And he's like, people are going to believe I'm going to die. People are going to pay to see this. And I'm going to get a lot of money for this. So he asks the guy the secret to the trick. And he's like, well, that'll come in time. But, you know, you got to take my faith and just wear this and you'll be okay. Well, what ends up happening is, let's just say it comes for him to try to, you know, use this trick. And he might try to double cross this guy, like he tried to double cross his former master from beginning of the story that we're told in, you know, mild flashback elements with. And let's just say something happens to the new magician, and when he goes to perform the trick, it might backfire, and there's a big recontextualization of this new magician and the old one at the same time, and asshole gets some comeuppance. But this was like probably the more entertaining, basic asshole comeuppance story here. I do really enjoy the vibes of this. I think some of the acting in here is some of my favorite performances of the whole show. Not quite like the best ever, but Billy Zane's character, he was fun as hell. He was like an enjoyable asshole. The magician characters were over the top and fun. This reminds me of something that you would see in Tales from the Dark Side more so than Tales from the Crypt. But I like it for feeling unique for this show. It's a pure, like, you know, vaudeville feeling type of episode. And I like that vibe about it. I don't know. It's like a turn of the century. Everything just seems to work thematically here, involving that. And then when you look at the story, you can peel back the layers of cheating to get to head. That's a common trope done in Crypt. But here there's a new angle about idolization thrown in there. And while we've seen idolization many times as a present theme, this one more so deals with the secrets of what you know and what you think you know. And I think the moral of the story for the main character is the guy thought he knew everything or everything he needed to know, but he's only grasped the surface because he's so one track minded. And I think this is a whole play on open mindedness and being aware. And you can definitely tell that self awareness probably would have played a lot better for this character if he had it. So yeah, I mean, really dug this story. It's quite simple, but it's definitely one of the standouts for the stuff that it comes to talk about that other episodes do, in my opinion. I really love this one. I don't really know what else to say. The only downsides to it, in my opinion, is how simple it is. There's not a lot to it, and it does feel kind of stretched. But other than that, I thought this was a very good, pushing great episode. So take that with a grain of salt if you don't agree. Okay? But my top two, I love unapologetically, especially my number two. I think by and large, this is the most underrated Tales from the Crypt episode ever. I love this episode, and I do not get why people never talk about this one. It's episode 64, Halfway Horrible. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and this story comes from the Vault of Horror number 28. Look, this story is a roller coaster of fun. There's lots of twists and turns. It's like a genre mashup of like a voodoo story mixed with like a crime noir, mixed with some medical science fiction stuff. There's so many things operating in the story, and there's also like a mystery whodunit murder twang to it that's also really fun. This just has a lot going for it, and it's honestly one of the more movie feeling episodes of the whole show, and I love it for it. The concept of this one is essentially about this guy who runs this company. He has this experimental drug that is acquired from tribesmen over in Brazil. And this drug is said to have these miracle properties to it. And it was discovered, and we learned this in flashback elements. This episode is very rich in context and story. It feels almost one of the more full stories that you would get from this entire show, where we go into flashback elements of this guy. He's with some cohorts in Brazil the moment he discovers his drug, but there's a certain ritual that he gets like shown in flashbacks, and he's kind of forgotten bits and pieces of this over the years, and it's all coming back to him because some of his colleagues are being killed, and he can't really explain why. And as the story goes along, you get this sense that there's this mystery killer going around, but at a certain point, he realizes that it may or may not be tied to himself and something he did in the past. So as more bits and pieces of what happened over in Brazil come back to him, he realizes that it all ties back to one of his friends that tragically had something terrible happen to him involving one of these rituals back in Brazil. And maybe this thing is haunting him, trying to poke at what good is left in a part of him, which plays into the title Halfway Horrible, because of this ritual that happened, or this drug. I don't want to give too much away, but essentially he's being haunted by his friend, right? Comes to the point where he realizes that he has to expel this evil that he's caused. And he recruits a shaman who says, well, this procedure might kill you. Are you sure about this? And he's like, whatever it takes. I need to get rid of this. So it happens. And let's just say the ending ends off on a very gross note, but kind of fitting for the story. And it's one of those morally gray stories where the guy really doesn't get punished, but he does in a fucked up way. And it is kind of ambiguous on what's going to happen moving forward. And that's really my only negative. I kind of wish it just continued on from there and wrapped up some mild loose ends involving certain things in the story, maybe involving the friend ghost thing, whatever's haunting him. But other than that, this one was creepy and fucking eerie, man. Not only that, there are some violent deaths in this episode that we see, at least, involving this guy and this potential evil that's within him, committing these kills. Yeah, good stuff. Was not expecting some of this. And honestly, the story kind of gets to me. I really see the themes of abusing friendships and casting friendships aside for your own personal gain. I do think that that's a prevalent story message in the story here. But I also look at it, there's also some other mild things that kind of add up here too. When you're looking at, trying to capitalize on something unknown or something that might be considered taboo to get the edge up on something that kind of makes you look like the evil one here. In certain perspectives, you can kind of paint that into the modern lens about cultural appropriation and abusing cultures that don't know any better to gain profit from them. It's kind of coming to talk about first world problems, which is very weird to find in a Tales from the Crypt episode, but I get that out of it. And honestly, oh yeah, I should also mention Martin Cove, who's in Cobra Kai, is in this. And he was great too when he was in it. The acting performances were super solid. I really dug how the story had you glued from the beginning, and we go through this whole ebb and flow of the story itself and how entertaining it ended up being. It was pretty well done. Minus a few things involving the ending. Like I said, I wish there was some mild loose ends that could have been wrapped up neater, but I do feel like the answers we got were fine enough there for me to warrant this a great. However, it's not as great as my number one for this season. And at my number one, it's my favorite of season 5, we have episode 55, Forever Ambergris. And this comes from Tales from the Crypt number 44, and I give this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Look, there's two people that make this episode fantastic. Bon Scott from The Who, I think that's his name, and Steve Buscemi. If you don't know who Steve Buscemi is, get Google. These two were absolutely fantastic in this episode. The story of this was super riveting. Some of the best body horror I have seen in anthology horror. Hands down goes to this. And yeah, I really dug the direction of this. And for an asshole comeuppance tale, this has a lot more layers than you think. And it's definitely one of the more different feeling stories of the entire franchise. So this one's about a scorned photographer. He hasn't had much luck in a long time. And I think this is taking place during the Vietnam War, because I think there's like some 70s aesthetic going on, where this photographer, he's looking for his next big break, but he can't seem to really find what that is. But he goes to this scout who says, hey, look, we can have you go back overseas to take some pictures, but there's this person that's going to be going with you, and the person kind of triggers something within him. The guy who I'm talking about is Bon Scott. The person that he's worried about is played by Steve Buscemi, but they seem to have a history together, and they're looking to kind of catch up, right? So you start to learn more about their history as the story goes along. When he goes to visit Steve Buscemi's house, and he has a wife there who's played by a very attractive blonde woman. I don't know her name for the life of me, but I can see why they went this direction moving forward. Well, let's say Bon Scott's character takes a liking to Steve Buscemi's wife and kind of starts to fantasize that he could have this life that Steve Buscemi has, but he needs to get rid of Steve Buscemi's character. So he comes up with this idea while they're on this plane going over to Vietnam, after he learns the plans of what's going on in a nearby town in Vietnam, and how this like pathogen is being spread airborne and how it's not safe to go over there. He decides to take it upon himself to kind of bait Steve Buscemi's character to go over into this town, and nobody else seems to know what's going on over there other than this one guy that Bon Scott's character talked to. Well, as the story goes along and Steve Buscemi's character comes back from that area, let's just say something really fucked happens to Steve Buscemi. And yeah, some grisly body horror, and unfortunately some tragic thing happens to him where they have to kind of put him down. But before he gets put down, unbeknownst to Bon Scott, he had written a letter to his wife, which plays a role in the finale of the story. And let's just say there is some really thought-provoking comeuppance. Not only for Bon Scott, but the wife. But the wife has a like a morally gray thing where maybe she was only doing this to get revenge. I don't know. But yeah, Forever Ambergris. Holy shit. Where do I begin with this? If you don't know what ambergris is, I looked it up. It's like the waxy intestines of a whale carcass or whale stomach. And if that's what they're getting at with like the body horror, that kind of makes sense. But wow, what a story. This one was fucked up and in some of the best ways possible. It was kind of emotional, especially when you watch Steve. What happens to Steve Buscemi's character is very tragic. The time period aesthetic was almost perfect for the airborne pathogen thing that ends up infiltrating some characters in the story. Did I mention the body horror is excellent? I mean that's what this episode is known for, obviously. But what I love is the character, I guess, development from Bon Scott's character as he goes along in the story. He thinks he won, and he got away with it all, but the rug is pulled from under him. And I love the ending note because it is morbidly grotesque, and it's thought-provoking in the sense where you think the wife is an adulterer, but maybe she's doing this to get some, revenge for her husband, who did not have the best thing happen to him from this other guy who basically just wants her for himself. And I think she's kind of aware of that, and I think that makes it more thought-provoking than your average twist in Tales from the Crypt. I can also see some themes about wanting somebody else's life and doing whatever you can to get other people's success and walking all over people and treating them like they're pieces of trash or obstacles in the way of you getting what they have, and how that's detrimental to, natural progress, of course, but it's also detrimental to the relationships that you have, and it's all obviously detrimental to friendships. And it's kind of a cautionary tale to not let that get in between all of that, right? So, yeah, I think Forever Ambergris is a classic in Tales from the Crypt. It's a great episode through and through, easy top 10 contender, as well as halfway horrible for me. And yeah, those two were by far my favorites from season 5. So yeah, that's my thoughts on season 5. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen season 5 before. What does your ranking look like? Do you agree with any of my takes? I know I had some spicy ones this video. But yeah, let me know down in the comment section how you would rate the season. What are your thoughts on certain episodes? I love talking about this show, and I can't wait. See you next time.